The government is still not doing enough to remove dangerous cladding from buildings more than 2 years on from the Grenfell tragedy. That's according to a committee of MPs which has accused ministers of being too slow to respond. They today, in turn, accepted they could be moving faster. To tell us more, our political editor Tim Donovan has joined us. Hi Tim.
Yeah, as we know, Riz, after Grenfell there were so many questions raised about safety in high-rise blocks, and much of the focus has been on the cladding which enveloped this building. Questions have been raised about flammability, questions about installation. So what has been done to learn from and act upon what happened here? According to this report by MPs, the government is still not doing enough to remove dangerous cladding from existing buildings. And it's being far too slow in reforming the whole building and fire safety regime. Now, those are sentiments endorsed by the Mayor today.
More than 2 years later, our building regulation system is still unfit for purpose. We still lack clarity on the basic questions of whether certain types of cladding are safe, and tens of thousands of people continue to live in homes that may be unsafe, with leaseholders facing huge bills for interim safety measures and other safety works.
Now, what has happened is some new regulations on building methods. The government did introduce a ban on combustible materials in blocks over 18 metres high, but not on buildings lower than that. Buildings like this one in Barking, which was convulsed by fire recently. There's still a lot of unhappiness locally about what happened here, as Aisha Baksh found out today.
The fire on the Barking Riverside development started on a balcony covered in timber cladding. It spread in minutes and took 100 firefighters to put it out.
Take the cladding down now! Take the cladding down now!
Some residents who were evacuated are now nervous to return to their homes with cladding still in place. Earlier today, they protested outside Barking Town Hall, demanding the local council take more responsibility.
They have to remove the balconies, they have to change all that wood. We can't go back having all that wood around when we all know that in 3 minutes the whole building was on fire.
Our balcony is still on. It's still, attached to our building, so I wouldn't want my kids to play outside thinking if someone was to throw a cigarette, it would go up within minutes.
Well, the developers are clearly in the process of removing some of the cladding. You can see it's been taken away from one of the balconies here, but it still remains on much of the rest of the block, and that's what's causing residents concern.
So the fire happened in section C.
Following the Grenfell Tower fire, the local Residents Association raised concerns about materials used on their homes, and since their own fire are still looking for answers.
We then have the builders, in this case Bellway, who have sold their leaseholds to Adriatic. Adriatic itself appoints Homeground, who deals with the leaseholds, and then we've got RMG, which is the estate manager for this particular building, dealing directly with residents, so it can send you in a constant dizzy loop.
BBC London also contacted many different companies. We were eventually told by the PR for Homeground, RMG and Bellway, insurers and a surveyor have deemed the homes habitable and remedial works are ongoing. Barking and Dagenham councils say they share residents' frustrations but claim they lack legal powers over the companies. Aisha Baksh, BBC London, Barking.
So, Tim, there's clearly still a lot of anxiety around this.
Anxiety about safety, of course, but also anxiety about money, because you'll know that there are lots of blocks that have this kind of ACM aluminium cladding. And that needs to be remediated, it has to be removed. And in the public sector, in the social housing blocks, that's moving pretty well. But in terms of private blocks, quite belatedly after pressure, the government eventually came up with a £200 million fund to say, you can start taking this cladding off those private blocks as well. But we're still hearing of disputes between leaseholders and managing agents. Leaseholders, some of them being given, £20,000 to £40,000 bills potentially. So there's still uncertainty around that. And the government has said today, the Housing Minister, James Brokenshire, has said on public social housing, feels most of that remediation should be done by the end of the year. But he acknowledges things aren't happening fast enough on private blocks. The situation's unacceptable, no excuse for further delay. And he says he wants a clear commitment by the end of the year. There are plans for all these blocks and that should all be removed by June 2020.
And news today of another type of cladding and its risks.
Yeah, bear with me because it's a little bit more technical. I mean, I don't know whether people are going to remember. There's ACM aluminium cladding has been the one we've all known about, but there is also HPL. It's high pressure laminate panels, they're called. Not clear at this stage how many blocks have this, but the government's said today that there are types of this where there are risks. When combined with combustible insulation, the government's saying they're very unlikely to adequately resist the spread of fire. So the government's saying that this kind of panelling should also be removed as soon as possible, to which people like Labour's shadow Housing Secretary Sarah Jones says, this cladding is lethal and should be removed from buildings. The fact that ministers waited until 2 years after Grenfell to confirm to people that they had been living in potential death traps is a disgrace. The government won't accept the kind of nature of that rhetoric and the language, but it is another kind of panelling. We don't quite know how many blocks are affected. More work to be done there.
And so it goes on. Tim, thanks very much for bringing us up to date. Tim Donovan.